Is it time to reveal everything now? Yes, that's right. What are you talking about? Is that the secret we were talking about before leaving? Exactly. Don't you think you are just extra baggage in our lives? That's why we decided to sort out the unnecessary baggage. What? I don't really understand. Wait a minute. Take care then. Overcome the obstacles and live well. After throwing the bag out of the car window, my parents' car drove away. I was born with a disability and use a wheelchair. Unable to do anything, all I could do was wait for my grandmother, whom I was supposed to meet here. 2 hours passed, and as it got dark around me, I trembled with fear. About 30 minutes later, a car appeared. Myra, are you alone? I haven't heard anything from Michelle. What happened? Grandma. Seeing my grandmother get out of the car, I felt relieved and tears flowed. Seeing me suddenly cry, my grandmother was a bit shaken, but carefully helped me into the car and decided to go to my grandparents' house. In the car, I explained the situation to my grandmother as much as I could. What a thing to say. Why would they say such a thing? They said I'm just extra baggage in life, that it's time to sort out unnecessary baggage. That can't be true. When we arrived at my grandparents' house, I explained the situation to my grandfather as well. Of course, my grandfather was furious. My grandmother was also angry. However, as soon as I mentioned a specific topic, their anger subsided, and their expressions quickly returned to normal. My grandparents looked at each other and began whispering quietly. Myra is not a nuisance at all. Don't worry, you're safe. I wonder where the real nuisance is. Will you help us reveal the truth to them? Seeing my grandmother's confident smile, I felt reassured. I hadn't heard what we were going to start yet, but I decided to help my grandmother. My name is Myra. I am a middle school student, born with a disability that prevents me from walking, and I always use a wheelchair. I have a neurological condition that prevents nerve signals from reaching my legs. Living in a wheelchair, I face various challenges every day. A mere 4-inch step that my friends easily step over is a major obstacle for me. That's why I tend to avoid going out. It's not because I have unpleasant experiences outside, but simply because my home is too comfortable. How is it? Easier to handle than the previous doors, right? Yes, thank you. Now nearly all the doors in the house are sliding doors. Opening and closing doors can be a struggle when using a wheelchair. By the way, the handrails in the bathroom are quite old too. We might need to replace them soon. Pleased with the newly installed door, I played by sliding it back and forth. Next to me, my father was organizing tools scattered on the floor. He is a builder and has been making our home more accessible. He has installed sliding doors, made flat floor surfaces, and installed electric switches that are easy to operate from a wheelchair. As a result, the house has become so comfortable that it makes me reluctant to go out. If there's anything you're concerned about, don't hesitate to tell me. My father always encourages, but he has his own work, and it's hard to ask too much of him. Therefore, I have never specifically asked him to do something for me. Because I don't say anything, my father often proceeds with home improvements on his own. And every time he finishes, he tells me to speak up if there's any inconvenience, making me feel his kindness each time. However, no matter how much he scolds, I never ask my father for improvements. Part of the reason is that I don't want to trouble him, and also because my mother says, "The financial difficulties are because you need a wheelchair and I can't work. So don't insist on getting what you want." My mother often repeats, "We are poor." I first became aware of this when I was in first grade in elementary school, struck by the firm way my mother spoke. Though my father works on building projects, I also understand that doors aren't free. Moreover, the renovations he does at home don't bring in any income. I first realized this reality in the upper grades of elementary school, and I began to refrain from asking my father for renovations. Despite this, The renovations my father pushed forward have made our home a very comfortable space for me. My mother candidly speaking to me about our state of poverty is also perhaps part of her way of ensuring that I grow up without relying on others. I believed that I was loved by my parents, but I realized that this belief was because I was still young and didn't understand anything. From around the upper grades of elementary school, I began to understand my parents' intentions a little at a time. I thought I was loved, but it seems that might not really be the case. I'll load this baggage here, so please handle that one. Tick. This is always heavy and troublesome. I'm sorry. After shopping at the mall, my mother packed the purchases into the trunk, while my father helped me into the car. To my parents, I was just another piece of baggage, like groceries or daily necessities. Sitting in the car, I disliked looking at my legs and turned my gaze outside. I didn't want to be treated as baggage, but I couldn't argue because I kept causing trouble. At home, I'm treated as a nuisance by my parents. Why are you in the hallway? You're in the way, it's too narrow here. I was just trying to go to the bathroom. Bad timing. I always tell you to check where we are and act so you don't bother us. I'm sorry. Every time you move, you're in the way. I keep telling you to stay quietly in the corner of the living room. You're such a bothersome baggage. A stationary cardboard box would be easier to handle. Despite wanting to go to the bathroom, I was cornered into the living room by my mother. Having to wait to go to the bathroom to avoid being called troublesome baggage again, I decided to distract myself by focusing on a TV show I wasn't even interested in. Understanding everything isn't always a good thing. As I reached the upper grades of elementary school, I began to see my parents' true feelings. At that age, their cold words were too much for me to bear. Every time I was treated like baggage by my parents, it hurt. But as a grade schooler, I couldn't live without the help of my parents. Gradually, I started to gauge my parents' moods and tried to be as little of a nuisance as possible. Are you not going anywhere again today? Yeah, I'll just watch TV at home. That's a relief. I watched my parents leave for shopping from the doorway. They usually return around the time the evening drama ends. Not wanting to be seen as a bother, I started avoiding going out with my parents and stayed home more. When I decided not to accompany them, my parents would smile brightly. Seeing their smiles, I felt useful and would smile back. Looking back, my mindset at the time was quite distorted. For me, not being a nuisance was the top priority, and I mistakenly believed that my parents' smiles were the result of my efforts. I was satisfied with my efforts, but in the 6th grade, a small incident occurred that seemed to undo everything. Do you use a wheelchair at home too, Myra? Yeah, I do. But you know, my dad has made the house comfortable for a wheelchair, so I don't need help from everyone like at school. I'm totally fine staying home alone. As the grades progressed, my class changed in elementary school. Some kids weren't interested in my wheelchair, but during breaks, more people started to gather around. This became a new routine after the class change, and I was already accustomed to it. At this time, it seems I said something inappropriate to a friend. My friend relayed to a teacher how I was managing being home alone, which resulted in a call from the teacher to our home. If a 6th grader can't handle staying home alone, why should the school interfere? Exactly. Why did you talk about staying alone? It's caused trouble. I'm sorry. It seems my parents were warned by a teacher that it's dangerous for a grade school child to be left alone at home late at night. As a result, I was no longer allowed to stay home alone, becoming a burden to my parents once again. However, as an alternative to me staying home alone, my mother gave me a new directive. Go to an after-school day service program. What's that? My mother showed me a brochure for the facility. The brochure featured photos of children my age intensely engaged in studying or crafting something. The after-school day service seemed to be a facility that provides essential life skills and opportunities for social interaction. Simply put, it's like a version of a child care program or a day service for seniors, but tailored for individuals with disabilities. Honestly, it's expensive and it's a burden to send you there. But as long as you use a wheelchair, your father and I can't support you forever. That's why I want you to make friends there, engage with others, and receive training so you can live independently in society. If I had been in the lower grades of elementary school, I might have felt that my mother was showing love. But now, in the 6th grade, I could somewhat understand the underlying meaning of her words. She probably just didn't want to keep me at home since I was a burden. Okay, I'll go to the facility after school and on weekends. Thank you for understanding. It really helps. Children understand and think more deeply than adults often realize. I pretended not to notice the real reason behind my mother's decision and continued to act as if I was unaware. My mother didn't realize I was acting and believed her words made me happy. Seeing my mother smiling, I felt a joy that I probably shouldn't have felt. A year after I started attending the facility, my parents seemed to be in better spirits more often. With me spending less time at home, I had become less of a burden to them, making their life seemingly more comfortable. Regardless of the reason, I started to feel okay with the situation as I was treated less like a burden by my parents. However, one day, my mother unexpectedly said to me, "You don't need to go to the facility anymore." Really? You're already a middle school student, and staying home alone shouldn't be a problem. I had already been attending the facility for a year, where I made friends. I started going there reluctantly on my mother's orders, but since I was often treated as a nuisance at home, the facility had become an important place for me. I would like to continue going there if possible. Okay, I won't go to the facility anymore. But I couldn't defy my mother, so I reluctantly accepted. As I stopped going to the facility, I ended up spending more time at home. Stay in the corner of the room, because you're in the way. I felt increasingly treated as a nuisance at home. I sometimes wished I could go back to the facility. I decided to subtly ask my mother if I could return. I got used to studying at the facility, and I can't concentrate at home. Isn't a place to study the same anywhere? I wonder what my friends at the facility are doing now. Why don't you contact them? You exchanged contact details, right? If not, you could call the facility and ask. From my mother's reaction, it seemed she was not considering letting me go back to the facility. Unusually, I expressed my dissatisfaction with her response. A few months later, my mother seemed to notice my sullen face and suddenly made a pleasant suggestion. "Myra, why don't you go out with your father and me today?" "Really? Where are we going?" "It's a surprise for when we get there." At that moment, I felt like this was the happiest event in all of my 13 years. A heavy bag stuffed with something was placed on my lap in the car. "What's inside this?" "Oh, no opening it yet. It's part of the fun when we arrive." "Sorry. I won't open it, so you can relax." The moment I tried to open the bag, my father, who was driving, suddenly turned around and stopped me loudly. Startled by my father's loud voice, I quickly apologized. As the car started moving, I excitedly enjoyed the scenery outside the window, wondering where we were going. After about an hour of driving, I realized we were heading to my maternal grandparents' house. We only see my grandparents once a year, and it had been about 3 years since our last visit, so my excitement grew even more. The road to my grandparents' house required crossing a mountain, and there was a rest stop with a large parking area where a small store was set up along the mountain road. Feeling tired from driving, my father decided to stop at the rest area, and he guided me out of the car. While buying juice at the store, it seemed like my parents were discussing something. "Mom just got a sudden urgent matter, and it looks like we'll be quite late." "That's troublesome. I wanted to get back early." "We're going to Grandma's house, right? Are we meeting up here?" "Oh, Myra, you're back already." Don't startle me like that. When I addressed my parents, they momentarily showed a surprised expression but quickly returned to a serious face and said something shocking. "Is it time to reveal everything now?" "Yes, that's right." "What are you talking about? Is it that secret you were talking about before we left?" "Exactly. Don't you think you're just extra baggage in our lives? That's why we've decided it's time to sort out the unnecessary baggage. What? What are you saying? Wait a minute. While I was still trying to understand the situation, my parents returned to the car and drove away, leaving me behind. Wait. Incredibly, I chased after the car as it sped away, but to no avail. However, my panicked cries seemed to reach them as the car stopped a little way ahead. Relieved, I slowed down my approach, but as I got closer, my mother leaned out the window and tossed a final farewell my way. "Take care then. Overcome your challenges and live well," she said, as she threw the bag out of the window and the car drove off. Left alone in the mountains, I was too shocked to move for a while. After some time, realizing that standing still wouldn't help, I went towards the bag my mother had thrown. Picking up the bag and looking inside, I found it stuffed with clothes with an envelope placed on top. The envelope likely contained a letter, but at that moment, I didn't have the strength to read any message from my parents. Looking at a clock at the rest stop, I realized it was already evening, and dusk was about to set in. I wanted to call for help, but my smartphone had been left in the car. Eventually, I decided to wait in front of the vending machine, hoping my grandmother would come. 2 hours passed, and as it grew dark around me, I trembled with fear. Rustling sounds from the bushes, maybe caused by the wind, brought waves of indescribable anxiety. At that time, the only comforting presence was the light from the vending machine. Another 30 minutes went by when a car pulled into the parking lot. "Myra, are you alone?" "I haven't heard anything from Michelle. What happened?" "Grandma." Seeing my grandmother get out of the car, I was overwhelmed with relief and tears flowed freely. Seeing me suddenly cry, my grandmother, though a bit shaken, gently helped me into the car and decided to head to her house. As we drove to my grandparents' house, I explained everything that had happened. "It seems like Dad and Mom have decided to abandon raising me." "What? To leave a child in the mountains, can such a terrible thing really happen?" I had reacted the same way as my grandmother when I was first left behind by my parents. But that's what really happened. What a thing to say. Why would they say such a thing? They said I'm just extra baggage in life. That it's time to sort out unnecessary baggage. That can't be true. Oh, right. There was a letter. I didn't have the courage to read it yet, so I handed the envelope to my grandmother. She immediately pulled the car over to the side and began to read the letter. What does it say? It's written very politely that they can't afford to raise you for financial reasons, and they're asking if we could take care of you for just a little while. The letter said Louis was on a business trip today, and Michelle had to accompany him, so they wanted us to look after you for 3 days. But it seems they actually planned to leave you here much longer. Where did you find the letter? It was in the bag. I see. They didn't want to be questioned, so they hoped you would find the letter after arriving at our place. That's why they arranged it to appear after taking care of Myra. The reason you were scolded for trying to open the bag was because that was their intention. My grandmother's speculation seemed clearly correct, just like her daughter. She understands my mother very well. After arriving at my grandparents' house, my grandmother explained everything to my grandfather. Upon hearing it, my grandfather became furious and said, "What a terrible thing. Myra, you never have to go back there. You're going to stay here forever. I won't ever send you back to them." Seeing my grandfather's anger, I felt this was true affection. It was entirely different from the feeling I had when I thought I was loved by my parents. I had always tried not to be a burden to my parents, but now I realized how wrong that was. I felt as if a curse from my parents had been lifted. It was an exhausting day with too many things happening. After arriving at my grandparents' house, I went to sleep without even eating dinner. The next night, feeling a bit calmer, I talked to my grandparents about my life with my parents. Being called baggage wasn't the first time yesterday. Why would they say such a terrible thing? Really, they told you to just sit quietly in the corner? What were they thinking? Each time I talked about my parents' actions, my grandparents' faces turned rapidly red with anger. My grandfather slammed the table in anger, spilling the tea. I felt a strange kind of joy that my grandparents shared my anger towards my parents. This was different from my feelings towards my parents, and I thought it was something I could safely embrace. However, when I mentioned a certain fact, their anger disappeared instantly and their expressions calmed down. I was really shocked when they told me not to go back to the facility because I had been going there for a whole year. A year at the facility. Yes, it was like an after-school program. I understand that, but every day for a year. Yes, I was going almost every day. Is there something wrong? Hearing this, my grandparents looked at each other and began to whisper. It seemed they felt something was off about my story. They explained things in a way that a middle schooler like me could understand. After hearing their explanation, I could no longer think of my parents as parents. What my parents called baggage meant that I was just an inconvenient accessory. Myra, you are not a nuisance at all. Don't worry, you're safe. I wonder where the real nuisance is. Will you help us reveal the truth to them? Seeing my grandmother's confident smile comforted me. I hadn't heard the specifics of the plan yet, but I had already decided to cooperate with my grandmother. It had been 3 weeks since I moved to my grandparents' house, and I was gradually getting used to life here. Today, my grandparents had taken the day off work, and we were enjoying tea together in a relaxed setting. As I savored the warmth of the tea, contemplating whether this peaceful life would continue, a loud voice suddenly echoed from the front door. The voice gradually approached the living room where we were. "Hey, are you there? What have you done?" My parents burst into the living room where we were sitting and started shouting angrily. They were so furious that they struggled to find the right words. Their faces were a mix of anger and panic, almost bordering on madness. My grandparents and I understood their state well, so we calmly continued sipping our tea without being disturbed. However, my mother's anger intensified, and she scolded us even louder than before. "This situation is going to cause us serious trouble. What are you going to do about it? Be quiet. We can hear you even without the shouting." My parents were taken aback as they didn't expect me to tell them to be quiet, and they looked at me, wide-eyed with surprise. Now free from my parents' control, I was in a position to speak my mind openly, a stark contrast to who I was when I lived with them. "Grandma, what is the current situation with Mom and Dad? Your actions have caused problems. We got a call from the city office asking if Myra was still living with us. The lie was exposed immediately." Nothing specific was said over the phone at that time, but this will definitely become a problem. It will be a problem, indeed. There's likely an investigation into fraudulent benefits going on. It's something that will come out eventually, even without us doing anything. "Why do you know about the fraudulent benefits, Mom?" While I understood that fraudulent benefits were a problem, the gravity of the issue was not fully clear to a middle schooler like me. My parents were sweating, beads of sweat on their foreheads, despite it not being particularly hot. Lewis had come to borrow money from us before because his job wasn't going well, remember? You said you didn't want to work and wanted to continue being a housewife, so we told him to get a job and turned him away. Yes, I remember that happened. I had always thought my mother said we were poor to keep me from being spoiled or asking for too much. But it seems they were genuinely in a dire financial situation. My grandmother had discerned that my parents were engaging in some sort of misconduct. "Why did you keep sending Myra to the facility every day if you were short on money? That facility costs over $10 each visit, doesn't it?" "Yes, we were struggling financially, so we kept sending Myra to the facility to help her develop social skills." But tell the truth. Weren't you just trying to make your own lives easier by sending Myra to the facility? You stopped after a year because of money issues, right? Yes, we ran out of funds and couldn't continue with the facility. Is there a problem with that? There is a problem. Even after Myra stopped going to the facility, you continued to pretend she was attending to receive disability service payments, right. Grandma's point was spot on. My mother tried to retort but couldn't find the right words. The fees for the facility I attended were just over $10 per visit, as Grandma said. This cost is supposed to be covered mostly by the subsidy, which the users are responsible for. My parents had been fraudulently receiving these funds by lying about my attendance at the facility. Knowing you could still receive the disability payments even if Myra wasn't attending, you probably thought there was no need to keep her at home. Since you could get the money without actually sending her to the facility, you left her with us, saving yourselves the trouble and still collecting the money. It's typical of you to always choose the easy way out. So, that's why you prompted the office to investigate us. Not directly, no. I just went to the local office and reported Myra, who is supposed to be living with her parents, is actually here with us as a result. They checked whether my parents were receiving benefits they shouldn't be. That's why you got contacted. It was because our local office communicated properly with your area's office. How can you read my thoughts so easily? How long do you think I've been a mother? A real mother can read her child's thoughts. It's no wonder you're puzzled you haven't been acting like a true mother, so you can't understand Myra's feelings. Hearing Grandma's words, I realized this was what true parenthood looked like. My mother, overwhelmed by Grandma's words, collapsed on the spot. My father was still standing, but now Grandpa confronted him. "You both are dressed quite fancy today? Michelle is carrying an expensive bag, and Louis, that watch looks quite nice too. Did you buy those with the money from the fraudulent benefits?" "No, this was bought with my own money." "Oh, weren't you poor before the fraudulent claims? If you had money for expensive clothes, you could afford them. Surely you weren't using Myra's disability and child support allowances as your spending money." "Actually, I bought this watch recently, and the clothes were a stretch to afford." The feeble excuses were clear even to me, a middle schooler. Grandpa looked at me and grinned, deciding to let me deliver the final blow. "Dad, you have several pieces of clothing with the same logo, don't you? And not just clothes, you also have many expensive sneakers. And Mom, your closet is full of clothes, right?" Unable to respond, Dad eventually collapsed, just like Mom had. I had thought Mom said we were poor as part of my upbringing, but in reality they were indulging in luxuries contrary to their words. My parents had frequently splurged on things they wanted. I remember throwing a tantrum as a child because I couldn't get a toy I wanted. That incident prompted my mother to start saying we were poor. So, I never doubted that it was a form of education meant to curb my selfishness and dependency. However, in reality, my parents were merely using the benefits they received because of my existence for themselves. In a way, my presence was what sustained our household. The real burden was my parents themselves. It was all our fault. "Myra, I'm so sorry. From now on, I'll truly act like a mother, so let's go home together." My mother apologized to me with tears in her eyes, seemingly having a change of heart. If it were the old me, I might have been deceived and believed her words. "So, you think if we go to the office together and testify that we're living together without any problems, the investigation might be halted, and we might be saved by that last hope? How do you have such solid knowledge as a middle schooler? I thought you would just obey as usual." Actually, I hadn't thought deeply on my own. It was thanks to Grandma's warning. Be aware that your parents might try to take you back under some pretext, especially if they ask you to accompany them to the office. There might be a scheme behind it. I've already told the office everything necessary, so I don't see any reason to go with you anymore. Even if I'm asked, I will stick to the facts and not change my story. Help us out. If you come along, maybe there's a way we can be saved. Are you really going to abandon your parents? You're heartless. Enough already. Are you asking Myra to help with your fraudulent claims? After leaving Myra in the mountains, you only seek help when you're in trouble. Isn't that too audacious? My grandparents were furious at my parents and tried to drive them out of the house. However, my parents were young and not easily moved by my elderly grandparents alone. Being in a wheelchair, I couldn't physically assist my grandparents, so I just supported them with a cold stare. Noticing my gaze, my parents suddenly calmed down and left my grandparents' home. After my parents had gone, my grandparents and I enjoyed a newly brewed cup of tea and resumed our peaceful weekend. Ultimately, my parents were arrested for fraudulently receiving benefits. Further investigation also revealed they had been misusing grants. My father had been renovating our home to make it more accessible for me, and most of these costs were supposed to be covered by grants, up to 2/3. It was discovered that he had inflated the actual costs in the construction projects through his construction business and used the extra grant money for personal expenses. I had believed my father was diligently making our home better, but it turned out he was just earning extra money. The total amount of money fraudulently obtained was about $50,000. Fraudulent benefit receipt is considered a fraud, and I was told that not repaying this money could lead to criminal charges. While I struggle to comprehend the magnitude of this amount, it represents a significant sum for my financially struggling parents. They managed to gather the money and completed the repayment, but it was borrowed, so they still owe a large sum. Although the money was repaid, the crime remains. They avoided prison but were given probation, which means there is still a risk of incarceration in the future. I had thought only people in prison were called criminals, but since they received a guilty verdict, my grandmother explained that my parents are officially recognized as criminals. Now recognized as criminals, they couldn't hope for social credibility, which resulted in my father having to cease operations of his construction business. Since then, my parents have been job hunting, but the stigma of being criminals weighs heavily, and they haven't been able to secure stable employment. They are currently making ends meet through day labor while striving to repay their debt. I have officially become a family with my grandparents and have started living with them. It seems that care has been taken to ensure that the benefits and grants I receive do not end up in my parents' hands. Although I don't understand the financial details, I am truly grateful to be able to live with my warm and caring grandparents. I have also started to adapt to my new school, and from now on I plan to walk my own path without worrying about my parents.